All right, guys, starting on the home page, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to scroll down. You're going to want to grab Assessment Rubric. Okay, it's going to take you for a rubric for grading the essay. As it launches, we'll pull it up. The nice thing about this rubric is that it needs to be changed, so we're going to go ahead and enable editing. On the left-hand side, we obviously rock a 5. Then we're going to center this up. It needs to be a 3. Go here, center it up, it's a 2. And then we're going to right align, it becomes a 1. Statement of the purpose. When you read the paper, you got to do a couple different things. The student's argument is obvious. This is in the claim. In the claim, do they choose who discovered America? And they don't go back and forth on it in their body paragraph. So you're reading the whole paper to evaluate this, but essentially they have to decide who discovered America, and you think that's what they're arguing for the whole time. If they do that, you're going to put a check mark right next to this part right here, and I'll highlight that. So if that's where it is, then that's where you go. Then you're looking down. If the main idea is clear, but there may be some unrelated ideas or pointless information, if you read something that's no good, then obviously you would check this section. The main idea isn't really very clear. You aren't sure which side a student is taking on these issues, or they don't focus very well on their arguments, then you would come up here. Like I said, if it's unclear, come to a 2. If it's good as gold, you know that they're picking the Native Americans, they're picking Columbus, they're picking whoever it is that discovered America, then that is their argument. Okay, a lack of important details, so if they have an unclear main idea and then there's nothing involved, then that's a 1. Essentially, if they just didn't do their paper, this is what you're rocking down here. Okay, student deals with both sides of the problem or brings up alternatives to his or her idea. When you're reading the paper, make sure that your partner or your peer has dealt with both sides. So they can't just address Columbus as the discoverer. They're going to go along talking about Columbus, 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 when in reality what they need to do is they need to discount Leif Erikson, they need to discount the Chinese, and they need to discount also the Native Americans, clearly, who were there whenever they arrived. So if they don't talk about the other side, then automatically that becomes a 3 because there is no default for this. So let's go ahead and consider that a 3, and we're just going to put a 3 right here to mark that, since there is no highlight option. And then finally, the paper has a clear main idea, and the rest of the paper fits well with the main idea, providing supporting details. Paper is actually effective at persuading the reader. So at the end of the paper, if you say to yourself, I think that it could be realistic that so-and-so discovered America based on their evidence, then you would select a 5. Let's say that they're not quite there yet, though, so they have some supporting details, but the argument may be weak. Student is trying, but they're not very persuasive. Let's say that they're, in fact, in between there. So let's go ahead and right underneath here, you would put a 4, and you would say, very close to convincing me. So there it is, very close to convincing. Whoops, we're going to highlight that just like that. All right, so what we have in this box is we have a 5, we have a 3, and we have a 4. Add that up to 8, 12. You would divide that by 1, 2, 3, and then the answer to this question right here, what is the score in this category? Student would get a 4, and we need to go ahead and make that a big 4 so that you can see it. Boom, there it is. Okay, so coming down to organization. Paper flows well, and the student uses transition words and phrases to help carry the reader from paragraph to paragraph. This is a 3-paragraph essay, so this one's difficult. What needs to happen, though, is that the paper needs to flow. You need to go from a claim to a mini-claim, and then in the conclusion, there needs to be some transition words or a phrase such as in conclusion, therefore, thus, hence, so on. And it just needs to flow. If it has one of those, so if it has a from an argument to a mini thesis and then no concluding transition, then it could be some transition words. If it reads sentence by sentence by sentence, and there isn't really any flow, then it's choppy, at which point you could award it a 3. If they've left it in outline format, it's very few basic transitions or no flow, so it'd be a 2-to-1 down here. I'm going to assume with a 3-paragraph essay, this should take care of itself, especially when you follow my outline, so we're going to hit it as a 5. Paper makes sense and follows a logical order. They don't jump around. They're talking about discovery of America. They're talking about the criteria for America and discovery. That would be a 5. Let's say that the paper makes sense, but it may not be in the most logical order, so it jumps around a little bit. Let's give it a 3. Okay. Introduction and conclusion match the purpose of the paper and would make sense to the audience for the paper. So essentially then, if the intro and the conclusion sum up what's in the body of the paragraph. So the intro needs to kind of entice you. It needs to give you that clear background information. This is the category where you need to be the most difficult on them. If there are any questions in your mind as to whether they've defined discovery, if they have defined America, if that logic doesn't line up and get summarized in the conclusion, then the introduction and conclusion are there but aren't strongly related to the topic of the paper. So that might be an option. If it's a very short or irrelevant introduction or conclusion, that becomes a 2. And then finally, if there is an introduction or a conclusion, so if they forget an intro or a conclusion, that's how you get a 1. So short. And focus mostly on the introduction here. I'm assuming since we're focusing on this, everybody is going to be rocking this. Okay. And then finally, student makes interesting connections between the ideas and uses interesting and varied sentence structure. So you need to have some short sentences, you need to have some long sentences, you need to have compound sentences. They can't be run-ons. And essentially what you're doing then is you're going to create this idea of flow in your paper for organization. Now, one of the problems that sometimes comes in here is less varied sentence structure. And then one of the issues with this rubric a little bit is it fails to follow an idea through to its logical conclusion. So in the organization piece, what you need to do is you need to make sure that you have all of your ideas down to an argument. If they're missing some arguments, then it needs to be here, and the arguments need to kind of be their new idea, their addition to the evidence and the explanation of the evidence. Okay? So let's assume that we got a 3 here. So we would go 5, 10, and then 16 is our total. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 bullet points, so we're going to divide that by 4. We're going to end up at another big honking 4. Control C, Control V. Okay. So then elaboration of evidence. For this paper, we're using very basic evidences. If the person has evidence in the paper where they have cited one of the videos, if it says Ming, if it says whatever it is, it's at the end of the evidence, it's in parentheses, and the period is on the outside of it, then they would get their point here. Notice it says a variety of evidences. So if you're using at least 2 of the sources that have been given to you, there are 3 sources that have been given to you, plus your textbook. So if you're using at least 2 in your paper, then they will get a 5. If they're using 1, they're not having a variety of sources. If it's formatted incorrectly, then it's in the wrong place in the paper. If they don't have any sources, then it would be a 2 or a 1, depending on how poorly you think their evidence is. If their evidence clearly comes from a source but is not cited correctly, that would be a 2. And then the 1 would be not cited correctly and no source in there. So the evidence is just kind of made up. The next part is pretty important for this one. The student expands on the sources. We'll go ahead and give that a 5 up there. The student expands on the sources, adding their own ideas and synthesizing the information to come up with the new thoughts on the subject. So when they look at the evidence, they need to explain the evidence, and then they need to go ahead and submit the evidence as their argument. So or convert the evidence into their argument. So the idea here is that you're expanding on it, you're coming up with a new idea, and you're putting it into your paper. I'm going to go ahead and expect that everybody's going to get a 5 on that. So you got 1, 5, a second 5, that makes 10. You divide it by 2 bullet points, and your score, average score in that category, becomes not a 4, Control V, but a 5. All right. Language and vocabulary, make sure you hit F, Control F, that will be find. You want no pronouns and you want no contractions. If there are no pronouns and no contractions and all of the vocabulary makes sense to the reader, then you would be recording a Control V, not a 4, but a 5 for formatting purposes. Highlight both of those. Boom. And then when you look at the errors, there are almost no errors for a 5, and as long as the errors don't slow you down in your reading, then in fact you can record a 5 for those as well. So Control V, not a 4, but in fact a 5. And so then you add it all up, 5, 10, 15, and 18 or 8 more makes 23. 23 out of 25 is a times 4 would be a 46, 92%. That is your goal. Ideally, we don't want to miss any more than 2 points on these. Now, when you're looking at the papers themselves, so let me go ahead and get a sample paper up here. What you want to do is you want to make sure that it's formatted correctly. It needs the last name. It needs your name. Whoops, sorry about that. Your name, my name, your hour, 24 November 2014. Who discovered America? It needs to be double space, Times New Roman. And any quotations need to be correctly formatted. As you read through it, it should be nice and smooth. And it should be a simple process. If you have any comments, okay, you highlight what you want to change. You hit comment, and you would type to them, hey, nice job on centering the prompt. Boom. Okay, and comment. Then they will get all your comments, and essentially we can make each other better through our arranged marriages and accomplish our goal of 85% of you writing at 85%. Then when you get it back from your peer, obviously you will make changes and then submit the paper to me. To share it with your peer, you click on share and you type in their address right here. That concludes our activities for today. Have a good day.